I never should have moved to Sunnierfield.
A couple of weeks ago, I gathered with my friends atop the old hill at the edge of town. Kendra's hill. And though nearly a year had passed since her revolting end, we finally mourned the loss of our friend. Well, I hadn't known her, but I felt the pain of my friends. It seemed we had all snapped out of the collective trance, a year-long madness. We'd been high on some paranormal narcotic, clogging our systems for a sickening amount of time. This was her favourite place, Bob sniffled. Why? I asked. Mark nodded at the endless green pastures beyond the borders of Sunnierfield, likely nothing more than a cardboard backdrop to that liminal world, and then he offered me a dejected expression. Kendra always said it was calming to look at the world from here, Mark said. She told herself that there was a way out, just over the horizon. I've never understood that, Emmy sighed, supporting herself on a cane. Seeing miles and miles of nothing, that just makes me feel even more helpless. Makes me realise I'm trapped. What are we going to do about it? I asked. Mark raised an eyebrow. Huh? There's nothing to be done about it, Harvey. I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to make the most of the life we've got. We're going to thank whatever lives below us. Thank it because we're still breathing. That's callous, Mark, Emmy tutted. Look, it means nothing to me. I'm an old woman. If I die here, I die here. I've lived a full life. And I understand, Mark. I understand why you want to hold so tightly to Sunnierfield. I'm very happy for you and Robert. To see love blossom in such a cold place is truly heartwarming. But Harvey and so many others in this colourful hell are not so lucky. What kind of life is this for them? A perpetual nightmare in a town of falseness. It's not that, Emmy, but I appreciate the sentiment. Even if we could bear the horror of living this way, how long would we have? How long before we suffer as Kendra suffered? As long as we don't rock the boat, we don't die, Bob grunted. That night was our fault, Harvey, not yours. We shouldn't have told you the truth about Sunnierfield. That's why this place took Kendra. What about Austin and the other blue shirts? I asked. They didn't rock the boat, did they? Sunnierfield still did horrible things to them. Worst things. To become a mindless monster, trapped in a deeper level of Sunnyfield's demented dimension. Perhaps death would be better. Stop talking about it, Mark muttered. Just drop it, okay? We don't want to draw its attention again. It was already dangerous for us to gather here. Dangerous for us to talk about any of this. We've honoured Kendra, but now we need to forget everything. We need to be what Sunnierfield wants us to be. How do we feel about a barbecue at my place tonight, eh? I'm all for embracing the fact that we're free of the past year's mindless trance. But let's be sensible about our newfound free will. We have to maintain the illusion of happiness. Fine, I replied. But we'll talk about this again. Sure, Mark said, walking away. Let's at least bide our time, Bob whispered to me. Mark isn't saying to leave it forever. I'll talk to him. Later. I nodded my head, beaming. But I concealed unending horror beneath the surface of my smile. And that was my strength. It was my barrier against the forces at work. I knew that the puppeteer, the awful mastermind behind this place, wanted me to feel joyous. He wanted to fatten me up on dopamine before feasting on my soul. And though I'd promised Mark that I would drop it for a little while, my mind was still racing. In truth, I was worried about him. Worried about Bob and Demi too, when I saw them jubilantly tucking into Mark's famous beef burgers at the barbecue. They weren't pretending. Not to my eyes. No, it was genuine happiness. They looked docile again. Pleasant. Unaware. And if the trance were taking hold, if the place were seeking to control us once more, having noticed our sudden downtrodden moods, then we weren't safe. I wasn't safe. And I didn't know how long it would be before I started to feel unnaturally chipper too. For as long as possible, I had to pretend. Had to play along. I want to ask, by the way, I said, speaking between bites of a burger. What's happened to your voice, Mark? Where's your accent? What do you mean? Mark grinned. I've always sounded like this. British? I laughed. You're American. It's due to Robert's influence, Emmy chuckled. Oh, imitation is the highest form of flattery, Bob shrugged, wrapping an arm around Mark. Really? I asked. I don't know, guys. It feels as if an unseen narrator has given up on attempting an American accent because he has no idea how to do one. and holding back laughter whilst narrating your lines might have been too much hard work for him. All right, Mark said. Let's stop breaking the fourth wall. Sorry, I replied, suddenly losing my jovial demeanour. Listen, Mark. I've been thinking about our conversation earlier. I'm struggling to forget about it, okay? We have to do something. You know that, don't you? We have to find a way out of this place. We don't have to do anything. Just relax, Harvey, Mark spat. It's all over now, okay? After the barbecue, I didn't go home. I went to the place that I'd been visiting for a week or so. The place I found on a walk through the forest of Sunnierfield. If it should even be called a forest, given that it barely covers a few acres of land. I found a pit in the rocks. A bumpy chasm in what appeared to be the Earth's crust, or the crust of whatever world we had entered. In the heart of the forest floor, set in a mound of rocks, a hole lurked. I had no idea how deep it went, but I felt an urge to find out. Not an urge planted in my head by some monstrous controller. An urge born of my own free will. The igneous rock almost looked, to my eyes, like natural steps leading into the depths of whatever lay below Sunnierfield. I thought of the groans I'd heard on the terrible night of Kendra's death, a bellow from the bowels of the wicked town itself. The place felt alive to me, a living, breathing organism, one which viewed us as its food. I ran out of the forest, sprinting towards Sunnierfield police station, and when I burst through the double doors, letting them swing in my wake, eyes shot up from desks. The 3 officers in our sleepy town seemed bewildered by my deranged disposition, or, perhaps, simply bewildered to see a civilian entering the station. Nothing ever goes wrong in Sunnierfield. Not on the surface. May I help you? Sheriff Grace Lawson asked. I panted heavily. I think I've found a way out. Calm your breathing, boy, the sheriff said. Found a way out of what? A way out of Sunnierfield, I yelled. There's a hole in the woods, Sheriff. I don't know where it goes, but if you'd be happy to spare a few of your officers, then... Oh, that reminds me, Grace. I said I'd help Margaret with a bit of gardening, Officer Myers calmly interrupted, ignoring me. She wants me to plant some sunflowers. Oh, yes, I remember, John. Go ahead. The sheriff smiled. Officer Myers tipped his hat at me as he left the station, and he grinned. But it was not a malicious grin. None of their grins were malicious. These were the faces of blissfully unaware folk, lost in the hypnotic grip that firmly held everyone in Sunnierfield. "Are you even listening to me?" I wailed. Something about a hole?" Grace Lawson absent-mindedly said. "Yes, deep in the ground. It might be our best shot." "Best shots?" "Leaving this place," I screamed. "I'm still not following," Officer Shaw said. I moaned in exasperation. "How many times do I have to say it? I think I found a way out." "But why would anyone want to leave Sunnierfield?" Sheriff Grace Lawson asked, raising an eyebrow. It was not the response I'd expected. I presumed that the officers would call me crazy, tell me that we were free to leave Sunnierfield at any time, tell me that we weren't trapped. What a bizarre notion. But there were no false pretenses. That was the terrifying thing. And it feels wrong to call them officers of the law. This wasn't a police station. It was a house of pawns, bending to the will of the force behind that place. "You're lost," I whispered, backing towards the main doors. "You're all hopelessly lost. But this hole, it really feels like an exit, an escape. I believe I've found our last hope." "I don't think you have," Grace icily whispered, halting me in my tracks with her unexpected chilliness. "I don't think you've found anything, Harvey Wayne." I gulped. "What's wrong with you? Is there anyone still in there? In your head? A person?" The sheriff's smile broadened, but I saw a tear trickle down her cheek. A drip of humanity that betrayed the intent of whatever unnerving force steered her body like a boat on a still surrendering lake. "I'm just living my life, Harvey Wayne," Grace whispered, a hint of sorrow behind her pleasant tone. "But I don't need to keep the order. Others do that for me. I'm sorry, Harvey. So sorry." I turned on my heel and retreated out of the double doors, heading back onto the main street of Sunnierfield. And there they were, as she had promised. The others. Dozens of them, men and women in blue shirts. People who had once been people, reduced to a faceless, ever-yielding mob, bowing to the dreadful mastermind at the heart of Sunnierfield. And as the crowd pushed towards me, moving as a unified entity, I ran towards the only place that I knew would provide an escape or, at the very least, hide me. The sea of shirts began its pursuit, a pervasive tide hunting me through the endless ocean of streets. My feet carried me back to the woods. I must have run for 10 minutes without pausing. I was winded, but adrenaline ensured that some subconscious part of me bore the brunt of the pain. I wouldn't feel the ache until later. As I stared into the chasm of rocks, however, my feet finally failed. I heard the crunch of footsteps against the forest floor. Dozens of feet stomping across leaves. I started to accept how insane the whole thing seemed, diving into an unknown hole. But it was no more insane than anything else in Sunnierfield. No more insane than accepting a torturous fate in a monstrous town. A town that didn't really exist, driven by a force that I knew I wouldn't ever comprehend, even when it faced me. And as I eventually summoned the courage to climb down the first step of rocky stairs, I had the terrible feeling that I just might meet it. About 50 feet down, I snapped my head around to look up, and I shrieked in soundless terror, my voice abandoning me. The blue shirts were gathered around the rim of the rocky pit in the dirt, standing and watching, either too afraid or too wise to follow. I wanted to tell myself that they were simply choosing not to leave Sunnierfield. They just want to stay above ground, I thought. But another part of me knew I was a fool. Why are you so convinced that this is the way out? I asked myself. My flesh started to drip with sweat as I became aware of the growing heat. By the time the foot of the hellish staircase came into view, I was struggling to breathe. The air was dense and humid, stifling, detesting my presence. Still, I pushed onwards, and I reached the tunnel at the bottom, a tunnel that did not look natural to my eyes. As I walked through it, I realised that nothing about the pit had been natural. The rock formations had been jagged, but intentional. A spiralling staircase leading into what I finally saw as a trap. Shadows danced across the walls, slinking behind gaps and crevices between the rocks, places I couldn't reach. And I prayed that I couldn't be reached by whatever shapes I was seeing. Shapes that disappeared by the time my torch's light fell upon the spots that they'd swept across. The heat was accompanied by a low rumbling sound. A sound I recognised. A muted version of the growl I'd heard in that living room on the night of Kendra's death. I realised that I'd been fooled once more. I had freely desired to escape, but the urge to enter that place had not been mine. I no longer denied that. I'd become so accustomed to Sunnierfield filling me with false joy and apathy that I had mistaken the feeling of fearful urgency as entirely legitimate. But something wanted me in that place, and it used my fear against me. I eventually saw a large cavern at the end of the tunnel, lit by burning torches. I stepped into the spacious area, and I gasped at the haunting sight before me. Within the sizable room below ground, 50 feet tall and hundreds of feet wide, there sat a vile mass of bodies, a squirming mess of blue-tinged horror. The people of the town formed a monstrosity, a living mound of wriggling but not resisting people, the servants of Sunnierfield. And as I took a closer look at the unknown creature, I saw that it had a face composed of bodies, with eyelids and a mouth that opened and closed, revealing swirling pits of darkness within the creature. "Please," I begged. I just want to be free." The paranormal behemoth did not respond with words. The world transformed, and I found myself trapped in an ethereal image that the monster sought to place in my head. A joyous memory of my childhood. My mother and father playing with me on our old street, pushing me on a bike. I knew what the creature was trying to do. Feeding me joy, turning me into another meal, before tossing my used carcass into the blue mounds that formed its frightful figure. I wasn't going to let that happen. I feared that I might never wake up if I were to let Sunnierfield put me under its spell again. I'd been lucky the first time, and that had taken the best part of a year. If I were to succumb to the happy images enveloping me, I knew that I would quickly join the blue mass. Harvey Wayne, the real Harvey Wayne, would perish. As I resisted, The creature's fury built towards a feverish crescendo, and then splotches of red from a toppled paint pot began to drip into the images of my childhood. Redness that revealed other images through the cracks. Images that churned my gut and filled me with pure fear. These were things that I knew the creature didn't want me to see, but I welcomed that, welcomed the horror, as opposed to the joy that the being wanted me to consume, as opposed to the joy that the being wanted me to feel. I saw rocks, barbed rocks, rising out of the ground like vicious canines, forming a forest of stone trees. But these were not unnatural formations. I was not looking at Sunnierfield. It's hard to explain, but I knew that, for the first time in a year, I was glimpsing a snapshot of Earth, the real world. I'd forgotten how it looked. In Sunnierfield, all of the colours are intensely saturated, a blinding kaleidoscope of sickly noise, designed to be the monster's idea of a joyful place. Something false, something horrible. Those jagged rocks, on the other hand, were the realest things I'd seen in a long time. And as I watched the creature's memory unfold, I saw something else. A black portal emerged in the rocks. A malevolent doorway to some world that shouldn't ever have touched ours. Something slithered loose, slipped onto the sharp rocks like an eel composed of a translucent material. It had the vague appearance of the substance that Austin had plucked from Kendra's eyes. And its form started to fade as it slid across the rocks, struggling to survive in our realm. Black plumes billowed from its decaying form. It needed something. And though the creature fought valiantly to conceal its memories from me, more of them tumbled loose. A little farther along its journey, the creature hissed as it passed a quarry, desperate to scarper away from the rocks there. After it fled, the creature's form seemed to diminish a little more slowly. Blackness ceased spilling from its form. I found that curious. The creature reached a Madagascan town. I don't know how I knew that. I must have understood what it understood. The creature watched the people of the island it had found, and then it returned to the stone forest, building a home beneath the rocks. It manifested matter from nothing, built a town below the earth, built a false sky, false grass, false buildings, a paradise hundreds of feet below ground. And then it lured people to its home, lured them to Sunnierfield. And it feasted on their souls, sucked the joy out of their eye sockets, returning to life as its victims screamed in agony. Joyless, mindless husks moved as one swaying wave towards the creature, piling on top of it to form a protective cocoon. Somehow, the being still didn't feel safe, so it kept digging below the false forest it had created, a forest already below ground. It burrowed deeper and deeper, 100 feet farther from the real world. The whole town was a prison below the earth, a prison that people somehow accessed from all points of the globe. And the creature's lair was simply a deeper underground prison. Upon registering this terrible truth, I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing escaped. Instead, the memories faded to blackness as the creature submitted, refusing to continue its fruitless endeavour. I braced for death, assuming that the being would want to rid its home of such a stubborn inhabitant. But when I woke, I was lying in the grass of the woods, and I was being pulled along by somebody, pulled by the collar of my shirt. I cried and wrestled free. "Whoa!" Mark cried. "I was only trying to help you. You're heavier than you look." What are you doing here?" I asked. I found you in the pit of that place. When I climbed down to find you, your eyes were bleeding. No, not bleeding. I don't know how to explain it. That substance was being drained from you. Oh, I still had joy for the creature to consume, I whispered fearfully, realizing that explained the emptiness in my body. But how did you find me? I saw them outside, the blue shirts, and I realized I wasn't a very good friend earlier. Mark sighed. It just feels so easy sometimes. So easy to submit to the thoughts, the happy ones. But when I saw the crowd filling the streets, filling the entire town, I knew something was wrong. Knew it had something to do with you. So I followed them. I breathed heavily. I don't know why it let me live, Mark. I wouldn't do what it wanted. I wouldn't let happiness fill me. I'm sure it'll drain whatever dregs of happiness remain before killing me. What did you see down there, Harvey? A thing below the ground, I whispered, shaking. Something alive? Mark shivered. I sighed. I don't know. It showed me something that it didn't want me to see. What? Mark asked. Where it lives, I replied. Where it built Sunnierfield. We gathered with the others and began brainstorming. I talked about the things I'd seen in the images, the jagged rocks, the people in the Madagascan town, and when we Googled related words, we quickly found the place. Singi de Bamaraha National Park. Then we searched for nearby quarries, and photographs of one rang a bell in my mind. There! Those were the rocks that hurt that thing, I whispered. The creature fled from that place. Well, that's got to be the key to killing it. But how are we going to get up there? Bob asked. I mean, we're not going to find any rocks like that down here. The important thing is that we know there's a way out. We just have to find it, I said. We're far below ground, but this is Earth. We can reach the surface. Somehow. Have you considered that the creature might fear some material within the rocks? Emmy asked, pointing at the computer screen. This page says it's a basalt quarry. I doubt we'll find any basalt in Sunnierfield, Mark said. Certainly not if the creature fears it. No, but he might have fled from something within basalt, Emmy suggested. A night of geological research commenced, and our heads quickly began to hurt. None of us were scientists. We only understood the basics. Igneous rocks such as basalt contain many different components, but my eyes were drawn to one word. I don't know why. Perhaps, within the creature's memories, I'd seen and understood far more than I realised. Whatever the case, my eyes were glued to the picture of a chemical element that can be found in high concentrations within basalt. Cobalt.